On a chilly October morning in 1984, three experienced fishermen set out from the small harbor town along Lake Ontario. The men were locals, well known for their skill on the water, and respected for their years of navigating the unpredictable moods of the lake. Neighbors recalled them laughing that morning, loading up their modest fishing boat with gear, coffee thermoses, and enough supplies for what was meant to be a short, routine trip. Nothing seemed unusual, and certainly no one suspected that this would be the last time they were seen alive. By the afternoon, the lake had grown restless. Winds picked up, waves began to crash, and a cold mist rolled in across the horizon. Families waiting on shore grew uneasy as hours passed with no sign of the boat returning. Calls were made, and soon a full-scale search operation was launched. The Canadian Coast Guard scoured the waters, helicopters circled above, and nearby fishing vessels joined in, hoping to find any trace of the missing men. But the search brought nothing. No floating debris, no life jackets, not even a broken piece of the boat. It was as if the fishermen had vanished into the lake itself. For days, the search continued, stretching across miles of Ontario's vast waters, but every lead went cold. Families were left heartbroken, clinging to hope yet facing the growing fear that the men would never return. The case was filed as a disappearance, one of many unsolved mysteries claimed by Lake Ontario's dark, unforgiving waters. In the days following the disappearance, the harbor town fell into a cloud of shock and silence. Everyone knew the three fishermen. They were fathers, brothers, and friends. To think that men so familiar with Lake Ontario could simply vanish without a trace seemed impossible. Search crews expanded their reach, covering wider areas of the lake and even sweeping along the rocky shoreline. Boats dragged sonar equipment beneath the surface, but still nothing appeared. Helicopters combed the waters from above, their searchlights cutting across the waves at night. Families stood on the docks wrapped in blankets, staring out at the horizon hoping for any sign of movement. "They have to be out there," one relative was quoted as saying, refusing to give up. Local volunteers even formed groups to walk the coastline, looking for scraps of wood, clothing, or personal belongings that might have washed ashore. Despite the efforts, the search yielded no evidence. Not a single piece of the missing boat was ever recovered. It was as though the lake had swallowed the fishermen whole, erasing every trace of their journey. As days turned into weeks, the rescue mission slowly transformed into a recovery effort, and the painful truth set in. The men were not coming back. Still, the mystery of their disappearance lingered. How could an entire boat vanish without leaving behind even the smallest clue? Whispers of theories began to spread, from sudden storms and mechanical failures to something darker, hidden beneath the waters of Lake Ontario. As the weeks turned into months and then years, the story of the missing fishermen became more than just a local tragedy. It became a haunting legend along the shores of Lake Ontario. Families tried to move on, but every time the wind howled across the water or a boat didn't return on time, people were reminded of the three men who had disappeared without a trace. Their photos hung on the walls of diners and fishing shops, fading with time but never forgotten. With no wreckage, no bodies, and no answers, speculation began to fill the silence. Some insisted the men had been caught in a violent storm and pulled under too quickly for anyone to react. Others whispered about mechanical failure, suggesting the boat might have sunk before the men could send out a distress signal. But there were also darker theories, ones that spoke of foul play, smuggling gone wrong, or even strange, unexplained forces tied to the lake's mysterious history. Older fishermen would sometimes warn newcomers, "The lake keeps its secrets. Once it takes something, it doesn't give it back." Stories of ghost ships and unexplained disappearances on Lake Ontario circulated, adding a layer of superstition to the tragedy. For the families left behind, the lack of closure was the most painful part. Without evidence, they could not properly mourn, nor could they truly accept what had happened. And so, year after year, the mystery lingered, unsolved and untouched, until, nearly 2 decades later, a discovery beneath the water would reopen the case. 19 years after the fishermen vanished, Lake Ontario would finally give up one of its long-guarded secrets. In the summer of 2003, a group of recreational divers was exploring an area of the lake known for shipwrecks. They weren't searching for the missing fishermen. In fact, most believed that case had been buried with time. But what they stumbled upon changed everything. At a depth of nearly 90 feet, half buried in silt and covered in algae, lay the remains of a small wooden fishing boat. Its hull was cracked, its paint long stripped away by years of current and corrosion. The divers knew instantly that this was not an ordinary wreck. When they surfaced, shaken and wide-eyed, they reported what they had seen to local authorities. Soon after, professional dive teams were dispatched. The boat's features matched the exact description of the vessel that had vanished in 1984. Even more chilling, personal belongings were still inside: a rusted thermos, tangled fishing nets, and a collapsed cooler wedged in the corner. Though the lake had preserved it, the boat seemed frozen in time, an eerie capsule of that final day. For the families, the discovery brought both hope and dread. Finally, there was proof. Their loved ones had not simply disappeared into thin air, yet the questions that had haunted them for nearly 2 decades were no closer to being answered. How had the boat ended up there, and why had the men never made it out alive? When authorities examined the sunken boat in detail, they treated it like a crime scene frozen in time. Divers carefully mapped out the wreck, photographing every inch before attempting to bring objects to the surface. What they found only deepened the mystery. Inside the boat, several items remained surprisingly intact. A set of boots lay neatly under one of the benches, as though someone had placed them there deliberately. A worn plaid jacket was tangled near the bow, heavy with water and algae. Fishing gear, rods, nets, and hooks, was scattered, but none of it appeared broken, as if no struggle or panic had taken place. A thermos still held traces of coffee, long discolored but unmistakably present. Most curious of all was the boat's condition itself. While damaged, the hull showed no obvious signs of a violent collision. The engine, though corroded, seemed to have failed abruptly rather than exploded or burned. It was as if the boat had simply stopped working and quietly sank beneath the waves. The absence of human remains puzzled investigators even more. After nearly 2 decades, it was expected that little would be left, but not finding even the smallest trace left unsettling questions. Had the men abandoned the boat before it sank? If so, why wasn't any evidence on life jackets, clothing, or bodies ever found floating on the surface or washed ashore? The discovery reignited speculation. Some believed the men had been caught in a sudden storm, others whispered of foul play. For the families, each theory offered possibilities, but none provided the closure they had been waiting for. The discovery of the sunken boat reignited old debates that had been dormant for almost 2 decades. In small towns along Lake Ontario, people gathered in diners and fishing shops, revisiting theories with a mix of excitement and unease. Everyone wanted answers, yet every new idea seemed to open more questions. Some pointed to the possibility of a sudden storm. Lake Ontario, known for its unpredictable weather, could turn violent within minutes. Perhaps the fishermen had been overwhelmed by high waves, forced into the water before anyone could react. But skeptics countered that no storm had been recorded on the night of their disappearance. The weather reports from that day showed only calm skies. Others believed the engine failure was the key. If the boat had lost power, it could have drifted far from its expected route, eventually sinking in deeper waters where search crews never thought to look. But again, what happened to the men? Why had they not survived, or at least tried to swim to safety? Then there were whispers of something darker. Some claimed the fishermen may have encountered another vessel that night, perhaps involved in smuggling across the border. A confrontation could have turned deadly, leaving the boat abandoned before it finally sank. With no evidence, though, this theory remained speculation, one that families found both horrifying and impossible to dismiss. The rediscovery of the case brought old wounds back to the surface. Families once again faced sleepless nights, tormented by the same questions they had lived with for years. The lake had given back the boat, but it had not revealed the truth. With the discovery of the sunken boat, authorities decided it was time to officially reopen the case. Nearly 2 decades had passed, but the families deserved answers, and the wreck provided the first tangible evidence since the disappearance in 1984. Investigators combed through old files, revisiting witness statements, weather records, and maps of the fishermen's planned route. Dive teams returned to the site multiple times, this time with advanced equipment. Sonar scans were used to search the lakebed for any sign of the missing men or additional debris that could explain what happened. But despite days of effort, no human remains were located. The lake seemed determined to keep its secrets. Forensic experts examined the items recovered from the boat. The jacket, boots, and thermos were tested for DNA, but after nearly 20 years underwater, the results were inconclusive. The boat's engine was studied as well, revealing signs of mechanical failure, though it was impossible to say whether this occurred before or after it sank. Meanwhile, the reopening of the case drew attention from local media. Newspapers ran headlines such as, "Mystery of the Vanished Fisherman Back in Spotlight." Television crews filmed segments at the lake, interviewing aging relatives who still hoped for closure. For them, it was painful to relive the loss, but they believed the truth might finally be within reach. The community, too, felt the weight of the mystery once more. People who had been young when the men vanished were now parents themselves, passing down the story like a cautionary tale. The fishermen were no longer just names in old files. They had become part of the lore of Lake Ontario. The reopening of the case brought forward people who had remained silent for nearly 2 decades. Some were hesitant, unsure if their memories still mattered after so many years. Others, however, spoke with conviction, convinced that what they saw back in 1984 might finally be important. One man, a retired dock worker, recalled spotting a small fishing boat late that evening moving unusually fast toward the open lake. He had always assumed it was just locals trying to beat the weather, but now he wondered if it had been the missing men or someone else entirely. Another witness, a woman who lived near the shoreline, claimed she remembered strange lights out on the water the night of the disappearance. They were not the usual glow of fishing lanterns, she said, but brighter, erratic, as if another vessel had been nearby. Her story fueled speculation about smuggling operations that were rumored to take place along the lake in the 1980s. Then there were the whispers in town, that the fishermen had debts, that one of them was involved in something secret, or that they had encountered people they shouldn't have that night. None of these claims were backed by solid evidence, but the lack of closure allowed rumors to spread unchecked. Investigators listened carefully, but struggled to separate fact from fading memory. After so many years, details blurred, and stories contradicted each other. Still, every new account added layers to the mystery, making the case feel both closer to resolution and impossibly tangled. The community's unease grew. If the fishermen had simply been victims of bad luck, why did so many stories suggest something darker had taken place? Just when it seemed the case had reached another standstill, investigators made a chilling discovery near the site where the boat was found. Divers, sweeping the lakebed once more, uncovered a small metal box wedged between rocks. Though corroded, it was still sealed tight, as if someone had gone to great lengths to protect what was inside. When the box was opened in a controlled environment, it revealed a collection of water-damaged documents and a few personal items. Among them was a fishing license belonging to one of the missing men and several handwritten notes. Most of the writing had been blurred by years underwater, but fragments of sentences were still legible. One note, though incomplete, contained words that sent shivers through everyone who read it. "We are not alone out here." The phrase reignited speculation that the fishermen had encountered another vessel that night, possibly under suspicious circumstances. Even more unsettling was a torn photograph inside the box. It showed 2 of the men smiling with their catch, but in the background, barely visible, was the silhouette of another boat. Investigators could not determine when or where the picture had been taken, but its presence in the box raised disturbing questions. Had the fishermen documented something they weren't supposed to see? And if so, had this contributed to their disappearance? The discovery only deepened the mystery. Instead of providing answers, the box painted a haunting picture of fear and possible foul play. The lake had given up another clue, but it came with an even heavier sense of dread. Despite years of renewed investigation, the case of the vanished fisherman never reached a definitive conclusion. The sunken boat, the scattered belongings, and the mysterious box told fragments of a story, but the most important piece, what truly happened on Lake Ontario that night in 1984, remained lost to the water. Some believed the men had been victims of an accident, a sudden storm, a mechanical failure, or disorientation in the darkness. Others held to darker theories, that they had stumbled across illegal activity on the lake, or that someone had wanted them silenced. The cryptic note and the photograph only added weight to those suspicions. For the families, the lack of closure was the hardest part. They held vigils by the shoreline, placing flowers in the water and speaking the names of their lost loved ones. To them, the fishermen were more than a mystery. They were fathers, brothers, and sons who never came home. Over time, the story of the vanished fishermen became part of the folklore of the region. Locals whispered about strange sounds on the lake at night, or shadows that moved across the water with no explanation. To many, the story served as a reminder of how unforgiving the lake could be, and how some truths might never surface. The sunken boat rests quietly at the bottom of Lake Ontario to this day, a silent monument to a mystery unsolved. And while the water may never reveal its secrets, the memory of those men lives on, haunting, unanswered, and unforgettable.